I was born on a farm north of a small town called Portage la Prairie in Manitoba, which is in the center of Canada. I grew up in a Christian home. My grandma will tell you that when I was about 3 years old, I came downstairs one morning and got on a chair and said, "Grandma, I have something to tell you, and I've accepted Jesus into my heart." And that was maybe my first kind of recollection of having some sort of faith. My parents were quite young. I grew up with a blended family. My dad remarried when I was 5, and he had me when he was 18. So I had young parents, and so a part of my early childhood was growing up with my grandparents, who were a tremendous influence on me. And so a lot of seeds were sown in those young years, and a lot of Bible stories and characters were made known to me. As I aged into a young boy, I couldn't tell you exactly why, but when I was maybe 11, 12, 13, somewhere in there, became pretty clear to me that God and faith was not something that I wanted to have in my life. And I would say the biggest influencers would have been just being in a rural community where I didn't have really many Christian friends, and I wasn't going to a Christian school, and I felt like it was not so much a lifestyle, but rather a set of rules, and I didn't grasp the relationship aspect of it. When I was in grade 7, going into grade 8, my parents decided to take me out of the public school that I was going to and put me in a private school. And it was already at this time when I had started to just be misbehaving. Nothing serious, no drugs or anything like that. But I was beginning to go down a path, and they could see some red flags coming up just with things I was saying in passing and the language I was using, and so they felt it was necessary for me to go to a private school at that time and make some better friendships. So that actually really affected my relationship with my parents, and we were on some pretty bad terms from that point on. And in the private school that I went to, I just kind of found the same friends who were all in the same situation as me and didn't want to be there, and just kind of sat there like this through Bible class. And any time that God was mentioned, it was really just falling on deaf ears. And just over time, my heart, looking back, my heart was just getting harder and harder towards God and faith, and there never was any spiritual connection for me, and I never went very deep with other people into why they believe what they did. I just had no interest. I became very self-focused and self-motivated, and through that, it caused a lot of grief for myself. I can recall just wanting to have nice clothes and being in the right group of friends. I was very gifted athletically, so I just had natural ability to excel well in sports. And school was pretty easy. I didn't have to study much to do well in those years. And that path of wanting to be accepted by a bunch of different groups of people and always be in the right place in the right time and be saying the right thing and doing the right thing really I started to lose my identity. I was a farm kid, but I was chasing other things. And to fast forward through the private school life, I remember in grade 10, we got caught with some alcohol at school, and they didn't really have to deal with that sort of situation too much. So I remember they sent the 3 or 4 of us to an AA course to learn about the effects of drinking and drink alcohol abuse, and they sent us to a soup kitchen in the city to volunteer for a couple of days. And I remember just thinking that that was just really overboard and they were over exaggerating, and we were kind of just enjoying the excitement of rebelling, and we, I think, collectively just wanted to break the rules even more, and we didn't care who had anything to say against us. We were kind of just rebels at heart, and in this private school in a small town, and we can do what we want, the typical sort of entitled teenager years of that. So in grade 11, I was able to decide to go back to public school, and they had a proper sports program, and I loved track and field. I loved volleyball and badminton, and I had lots of friends who I used to go to school with, who I now was re-entering school with, and I found myself in a place where people who knew me before had not really had much contact with me for the last few years, and now I was trying to regain these friendships and these acceptance into these groups of friends. And of course, high school is really cliquey, so it was tough for me to find where I fit in. And just this need for acceptance, this need to fit in and do well and be popular was like just fueling everything I did. Whether it was having a car that was fast, or having the right girlfriend, or doing the craziest thing at the parties as the parties started to start, and house parties, and to have that story of like, oh, did you hear Kelvin did that? And I started to really fuel my life on those moments. And looking back, I was just very insecure. I was very unsure of who I was. I didn't know who I was. And my parents were only seen as rule givers, and our relationship suffered. We didn't discuss faith in a deep way. We didn't discuss life goals or dreams in a very meaningful way. I just felt like I could go to my grandparents for comfort, and my parents would just be the people I'd have to go home to get a punishment from. And it was hard. Life on the farm was hard as well. We were working very hard. I grew up just doing a lot of physical work, and that just added to the resentment of my parents. And I guess I would have had my parents and God just compartmentalized into this set of do's and don'ts. And no one really knew where I was at emotionally, because I didn't know how to express myself properly, and no one, I felt, really knew how to communicate with me, and I didn't know how to communicate with them what I was feeling. In high school, I started to lust a lot for girls, and that led to a lot of short-term relationships. And I remember I began having sex when I was 16 with my girlfriend at the time, and that kind of just opened that door up, and over the next 10 or so years, that would become my number one vice, my number one stumbling block, was lust for women. And it's funny, because I had great women in my life. My grandma and my mom and sisters were, amazing people, and yet I somehow looked at women as an object and something that I could take advantage of and manipulate. And over that time of about 16 to 26, the casual relationships would come and go, month in, month out. Sometimes I'd have a girlfriend, sometimes I'd cheat on that girlfriend, and sometimes I'd have multiple women that I could call up or hang out with at any given time. And that became part of my identity. My friends at the time would definitely knew that Kelvin was able to pick up girls and to kind of get what he wanted. He was good looking, and he was athletic, and he just took risks, and that's part of who I was. And for a long time I thought that was just going to be something about me that I wouldn't be able to change. After high school, I barely graduated. I ended up being kicked out of my home in about a week before final exams, and I was really upset. I really didn't want to be at home ever, and I wanted to be getting high or out drinking or making money to buy something cool, and that was my life after high school. And I know I had lots of prayer happening for me at that time, but my connection with my parents was at a pretty all-time low, and our communication was at a pretty all-time low. And my communication and relationship with any Christians was at an all-time low. And so faith had really, and God had really left the conversation starting after high school. I moved off the farm and moved into town. Like I said, barely graduated high school. I got a job working shift work, and was just working and making good money for a kid that age. And I ended up buying a overly priced truck because it was fancy and it had some big rims and it looked nice. And about 2 months later, after I had begged my dad to co-sign a loan for this thing, I lost my license from drinking and driving. And that was in New Year's Eve of 2007. And looking back, God had his angels around me from day one. And I had fallen asleep at the wheel on my way home from a New Year's Eve party. And I woke up at 7 in the morning to cops knocking on my window saying, can you please shut off the vehicle? The vehicle had rolled to the side of the road, and it was wintertime, so it had just gotten a bit stuck on the side of the road. It was still running, it was still in drive. And I woke up, and about 5 hours after I'd had anything to drink, I still blew over 3 times the legal limit. So I was really, really gone that night, and God had spared my life that night. I wasn't even on a road going to my house at the time, so I was in the middle of the country, in the middle of nowhere, and someone had phoned the police saying, hey, there's somebody asleep at the wheel in this vehicle. So I remember my mom coming to pick me up from jail that day, later that day, and just the disappointment on her face and just the sadness. I think she saw the lifestyle I had chosen for myself and just the path that I was heading down, and it was really hard for them.